Hello and welcome back to some more of the Great Dark Beyond reveals. Today we have Demon Hunter, and we've had a little sneak peek into what Demon Hunter was going to offer. I thought we were going to get a demon package because we were shown Zorthoth, Breaker of the Stars, a 6-mana 5/5 demon that had Battle Cry, add 2 stars to both sides of your hand. When they collide, deal 5 damage to all enemies. Turns out we're not getting a demon package, we're actually getting the complete opposite, but we'll deal with that in a little while. First, let's see some of the new cards. We have Eldritch Being, 1 mana 1/3 minion, Outcast, and Spell Burst. Shuffle your hand. Wow, incredible. We have Worst Diamol in the 1-drop department. Worse because it doesn't have the tribe on it, of course, that Diamol at least had a tribe on it. Alright. Shuffling your hand, typically in Hearthstone, is not a particularly impactful effect, because most cards in Hearthstone don't care where they were cast from your hand. Now, you might be pointing out to me, Andalono, Demon Hunter is the class that is the exception to this rule, and you're right. You play Zorthoth, Breaker of the Stars, it puts those 2 stars on either side of your hand. You then play your Eldritch Being, you ideally outcast it, which is impossible immediately because the stars are on the outside, but let's not ignore that anti-synergy. You spell burst instead for, you know, an additional mana point or something. You shuffle your hand, and you pray for, and I don't know what the percentage odds of these two coming together. Obviously, it depends on the number of cards in your hand. It gets less and less likely the more and more cards you have in your hand. But you pray that you get a better scenario than they were in to start with. And sometimes you will hit both cards. And in total, it's like a 3-card combo that might require you 8 mana to do 5 damage to all enemies. And get a 5/5 demon. Wow, what an incredible combo. And also, again, you might be screaming at me now, but they have Outcast. You want cards on the outside of your hand. Aren't you frustrated when you want to play your Outcast deck and the Outcast card gets stuck in the center of your hand, and you can't, like, get over a hump of another big minion? Now you play Eldritch Being and you Spell Burst and just pray to the gods of RNG that it outcasts the card. So like your CCG, you might be able to put it onto the outside of your hand and you get 1 more random first edition demon from the past. Incredible, right? Wow, what value. Okay, I'm actually not telling you the full picture here. What is important to know about Eldritch Being is it's been printed with the idea of a new mechanic that is going to be inside of the Demon Hunter class, and that is crewmates. 2 mana Demon Hunter spell, Emergency Meeting. Get 2 4/4 crewmates, put a random demon that costs 3 or less between them. Okay, you need to know what a crewmate is, because on paper you just see this and think, oh, it's a 4/4 token. Not quite. It's actually better than just being a 4/4 token. The crewmates are all Draenei that have one of the bonus effect keywords on them. So there is a Taunt, Poisonous, Lifesteal, Wind Fury, Reborn, Rush, Elusive, and Divine Shield variant. Importantly though, they all say Battlecry summon every adjoining crewmate. So if you can get a row 3 of these in your hand together, and you pay 4 mana for one of them, it summons all of them in that line. Which is pretty spooky. Obviously, just playing one of these as a 4 mana 4/4 with a keyword isn't good enough for standard. But if you get 2 of these bad boys, that is 8 of stats for 4. That's pretty spooky. And if you get 3 and you get it on turn 4, you're in big trouble against that. That is a really scary, huge tempo swing. So now that we know what these are, let me come back to Emergency Meeting. This card's insane if you play this on 2. Sure, it is somewhat 2 mana do nothing. You can sometimes take the early game a little bit slower. I know aggro decks exist, you might get aggro down to some degree, but you're getting a huge payoff potentially. Your Emergency Meeting on 2, this will give you a demon that costs 3 or less to play on turn 3. And then on 4, this guarantees that you'll get 4 mana 8/8 in stats, with 2 random keywords on it. In that regard, I actually kind of see this as Ancestral Knowledge Plus, because it's a 2 mana card that gives you, I mean, it gives you 3 cards, but it's effectively draw 2, because your intention is to play those 2 crewmates together in one instance. Now, Ancestral Knowledge was draw 2 cards from your deck. Typically put good cards in your deck, so it's like better than average cards than you would be expecting in Hearthstone. What I'll say about Emergency Meeting is the random demon is probably worse than drawing a card, and say probably, it's almost certainly worse than drawing a card. However, the other card you get from Emergency Meeting is better than the average card that you'd put into your deck. So I think overall, it works out better than Ancestral Knowledge. Also, you don't overload, which is one of the weaknesses of Ancestral Knowledge. Sure, it's a 2 mana draw 2, it's better than Arcane Intellect in that regards, but you pay for that cheat later on with the overload effect instead. You don't have that in Emergency Meeting. Like, this is a very comparable card, and it's kind of insane if you can do this on 2. Worth mentioning, I've not put the full roster of demons that cost 3 or less, but there are some that are, you know, better and some that are worse. Obviously, you don't really want to hit the outcast cards because you will not be outcasting them, as they will be stuck between your Draenei. So most of the time, hitting one of the Demon Hunter ones is pretty weak. You also don't ideally want something like Fearless Flame Juggler, although Demon Hunter can hit itself in the face with a few different mechanics that may be able to trigger the Fearless effect, but I don't think you'll be putting that in that deck typically. There are some pretty good rolls, though. I think hitting Observer of Mysteries, for example, would be an insane roll. You do this 2 mana do nothing, you're doing 3 mana 2 to cast 2 random secrets, and you just interrupt your opponent to give you that extra turn to get to this 4 mana 8/8 stats. I think that'd be a pretty good roll to get. Malefic Rook as well, because I think this is going to be somewhat of a tempo-ish deck. You're going to be playing on curve for most of the game. Sure, you're taking 5 damage, but it's a big lot of stats for turn 3. And actually sort of makes up for the fact that you did nothing on turn 2. Then there are some in-betweeny cards, of course, like Voidwalker is fine. Wouldn't see playing standard normally, but you could play it on 1 and maybe push the button. Sorry, you could play it as 1 mana on 3 and then push the button to make up the curve. You could hit something like Fiddlefight Imp, which would fill out the curve nicely and give you some more value. Whether or not you want that extra value to, you know, to stop, sort of put like more gaps between your crewmates is up for debate, but at least for this combo, it wouldn't be at the end of the world to get 2 more spells, because you're probably playing the 4 mana 8/8 and not waiting for more crewmates down the line. You could hit new cards as well, like Relentless Wrathguard, that is another value proposition, and remember as well, you could hit an Amalgam with this, so they're kind of like the spread of cards you're sort of looking at in the demon department. But as I said, to get this 8/8 stat line, it's kind of crazy. Just to put this into comparison, when Imp Warlock was like at its best, one of the real mischievous parts of the combo was getting Mischievous Imp infused, aka 3 minions had to die before this was played, by turn 4, and if you could, this was 4 mana 9/9 in stats. That was backbreaking at the time. Now, Emergency Meeting has some setting up again, like the Mischievous Imp. Instead of infusing, you have to take a turn off to play this, and then you're playing a random 3 or less demon, which could be weak. But the payoff is comparable. You're getting 8/8 in stats, but you're getting keywords on them. So, sure, you're losing 1 mana, 1/1 in stat lines, but you're gaining that back as keywords instead. Also worth noting, I think it'd be easier to clear as a control deck 3 3/3s rather than 2 4/4s. It's kind of like, I always feel like 4 health is in that awkward range between spells being able to deal with things and not being able to deal with things. So I think it's more likely this lives on the board and does some more damage. Also worth bearing in mind, some of the keywords are not made equal to others. Hitting Reborn on one of these crewmates that you get is effectively turning it into like an 8/5 stat line instead. Plus the 4/4 you would also get on the other one. Like, it's potentially insane stats, so watch this space. I think this card could be truly disgusting in the early game. Also, as a reminder, these crewmates go into your hand, and they are Draenei, hence they work with Draenei support. So I think the Demon Hunter package is actually a Draenei deck, and you might want to put some of the hand buffing cards in, like Crimson Commander. You could also use stuff like Astral Vigilant to copy your crewmates to try and continue chains of crewmates in your hand. Perhaps you get later into the game, you do this combo rather on 2, like on 6 instead, and you just Astral Vigilant one of the crewmates. So instead of getting 4 mana 8/8, you're getting 4 mana 12/12 in stats, along with whatever else you want to do during that turn. I actually can see there being some really disgusting tempo swings with this deck. It's just whether or not you can survive until you can do these big crewmate turns. We also have another spell called Headhunt, 1 mana Demon Hunter spell, deal 2 damage, get a 4/4 crewmate with a random bonus effect. Wow, okay. This is like Flame Geyser Plus. It's kind of crazy, no? Flame Geyser sees play in Mage, in Elemental Mage, it sees it in the combo Mage decks, and that's 2 damage, the same as Headhunt, but you only get a 1/2 Elemental. This gives you a 4/4 crewmate, that's a huge amount of stats. Also, I don't know if, by the way, it says 4/4 crewmate with a random bonus effect. I assume that means you get the crewmate with the effect on it, and another bonus effect on top of that as well, so it's like a crewmate plus, which is extremely powerful. It's very good for trying to continue these chains of crewmates whilst also keeping your opponent in check by dealing damage either to their minions, or if you're ahead of the game, put it on their face instead. It has got a versatility in that regards. There is a potential disgusting situation that can occur as well. If you start with the coin, and you're on turn 2, if you play Emergency Meeting and Headhunt, you're going to have the order of Crewmate. I mean, it depends which way around you play this, but you're going to have Crewmate, Demon, Crewmate, Crewmate. On turn 3, you play the Demon, and on turn 4, you're getting 12-12 of stats. It requires you to have the coin to do this, but it is really, really, really disgusting. And by the way, you do have to do this on the same turn, otherwise the card that you draw will interrupt the Crewmate combo. Unless the card you draw is a Crewmate, of course. More to that later. One other thing I'm going to point out, I don't think Jotun will see any play in this deck, but Jotun has been kind of like crying out for a deck with spells that are good to cast copies of, and I think Headhunt and Emergency Meeting with this Crewmate deck actually kind of meets that bill. If you can Jotun an Emergency Meeting as you draw it, that puts your Crewmate, Demon, Crewmate situation into your hand. You could then maybe play the Emergency Meeting from your hand, and then you would have Crewmate, Demon, Crewmate, Crewmate, Demon, Crewmate. And all you have to do is play one of those demons, or if you can play both the demons ideally, then you're doing 4 mana for 16/16 in stats. That's pretty disgusting, right? So, I don't think Jotun will work, but I might actually try to make this like mid-range version of the deck work with Jotun to give me some extra value. And also Jotun says spells have to be cast at enemies, by the way, so Headhunt will always hit an opposing thing, unlike the arcane mechanic in Druid where it could hit your own face. So it has that going for it. And that's not all, by the way. We have more Crewmate support. Voronai Recruiter, 2 mana 1/3 Draenei. At the end of your turn, get a 4/4 Crewmate with a random bonus effect. Again, I don't know if this means that you're getting the Crewmate with, you know, its own keyword and then a bonus effect on top of that. It's kind of like how I assume it is read based on the other card that just says get a Crewmate. But maybe this is something that was overlooked during the writing of the card. I'm not sure. Either way, you're getting a Crewmate at the end of each turn. Reminds me a lot of Vile Apothecary in the Concoction Rogue decks. Now, Vile Apothecary was eventually dropped from a lot of Concoction decks because it was just a bit too slow, a bit too ponderous. I will say, standalone, the Concoctions are better than the Crewmates. It's better for you to get this Concoction together. Typically, you know, if you forgot how the Concoctions work, they were like 3 mana spells that, when you got 2 of them together, they would combine into one single spell. They were better to cast in their own individual right versus just getting like a Crewmate in your hand and just playing the Crewmate on its own. Because then you're playing 4 mana 4/4 with a bonus effect, which is not good enough for standard. I don't think the Crewmate situation has got enough support that you could run this without the Voronai Recruiter though, unlike Vile Apothecary, which also had the advantage of Rogue was able to bounce a lot of their cards back and then replay them to get you more concoctions, which was part of the reason why this Vile Apothecary was dropped eventually. So yeah, I can see Voronai Recruiter seeing some play. It's just a bit unfortunate that it's very, very slow. You're also getting a Crewmate, then you're going to draw a card on your next turn if this lives. Then you'll get another Crewmate, then you're going to draw a card. You don't get this continuous line, which means you have to be able to play the cards in between the Crewmates or shuffle your hand. Get it? Maybe the Eldritch Being wasn't completely worthless. Anyway, so yeah. I think if any of the Crewmate cards aren't going to make the Crewmate deck, I think this would be the one that they would drop, the Voronai Recruiter, because it's just a bit too slow. It doesn't easily chain together with other things. Slightly weaker than rest. Also, one of the things that was going for Vile Apothecary was it's sort of harder to do 4 damage to a minion. It's one of those common break-off points where spells say, like, deal 3 damage and then do this. Not a lot of them say do 4 damage and then do this, or a few of them do. So even though Vile Apothecary is a 3 mana thing with 4, and the Voronai is 2 mana with 3. I think it's easy to deal with a 2 mana 3 health minion and a 3 mana 4 health minion. Things may have changed now, but that's my gut feeling. We also have a final thing for the Crewmate deck. We have Deirdre Rebel Captain. 4 mana 5/4 Draenei with Rush, Battlecry. Shuffle all 8 Crewmates into your deck. You Death Rattle, draw one of them. Okay. When I saw this, I actually thought this card was extremely weak, and it's kind of like odd as well, because you want your Crewmates to be in your hand in these contiguous chains. Putting 8 of them into your deck, there's a decent chance you're not going to draw 2 of them together, because you're probably going to have more than 8 cards in your deck when you play this, unless you draw unbelievably quickly. And that is a legitimate use case of this card, is that you just draw unbelievably quickly, and you do actually shuffle in 8 cards into your deck, and your deck had no cards to begin with, so you're guaranteed to start drawing these Chain of Draenei together. It's still not ideal, to be completely honest with you, because, you know, you'd have to wait for 2 turns to get the chain of 2 cards together, which is just too slow at that stage of the game. But there are little cheaty things you can do about it. Firstly, this is a Draenei. You can Astral Vigilant this card, so rather than shuffling just 8 crewmates into your deck, you could put 16 crewmates into your deck, at which point your deck is becoming way more Draenei. And if you can imagine playing against like Plague Death Knight, you're going to hit a critical mass, and it's normally around this 16 to 20 mark where you're going to start drawing chains and chains of crewmates together. Now, you're probably going to need some cards that say draw in your deck, because otherwise you don't have the advantage of the plagues where they cast when drawn and then draw another card. You just get the card. So you're probably going to run this with some sort of draw package as well to make sure you can get these chains of 3 or 4 Draenei. But I don't think this is crazy, to be completely honest with you. Also worth noting, Velen is a Draenei and will trigger both the Battle Cry and the Death Rattle of your Draenei. This has both a Battle Cry and a Death Rattle. So rather than just, you know, Astral Vigilanting the Durdra, why don't you just do it on Velen instead and get a Velen back? In which case you're, again, shuffling another 8 crewmates into your deck, and you're getting the effect of the Death Rattle of drawing an additional 1 of them, which is pretty nice. Just to get to the context of the card, by the way, obviously 4 mana 5/4 Rush, Death Rattle, draw a card. I think that is like around the realm of maybe sees players like the 30th card in the deck, but it's not something you would build your deck around. So it's really, can you abuse the situation where you put enough crewmates into your deck and have enough draw that you can just keep playing 4 mana, summon, you know, 8, 8, and 12, 12, 16, 16 of stats, and eventually break your opponent's back. That's kind of how I see this card. One final thing worth mentioning as well with both Velen and Durdra in this matter. Demon Hunter is another way of abusing Death Rattles, and that is return policy. So you could discover a friendly Death Rattle card that you played this game, you could hit Velen or Durdra, and you get to trigger the Death Rattle, which means that if, for example, you have a crewmate on the right side of your hand, you can drop a return policy. That will give you another crewmate on the right side of your hand because you will draw it to the right. And then you'll finish that off, I believe. I think this is the order this works in. That you'll then get the other Draenei. I'm actually not sure about that. Maybe you get it interrupted. Either way, you can get another Durdra or another Velen back, play it, put more crewmates into your deck, and the combo goes on. I'm actually not sure now that I think about it, the way that the return policy works. I can't remember if you get the card and trigger the Death Rattle. You'd think it would say that based on the ordering of the effect. Yeah, it probably works that way. Screw that, it probably doesn't work as well as you want it to, but still more crewmates into the deck. Fill your deck with crew. One other thing worth mentioning, because obviously one of the things that's going to make or break this deck is the ability for you to interrupt the chain of Draenei. Oh, sorry, break the interrupts in the chain of Draenei by doing something with those cards. Priest, which you can tourist into as Demon Hunter, has a few ways to get you some of these crewmates together. Envoy of Prosperity, potentially, if you interrupt the chains with heavier cards than them. You could use Envoy of Prosperity for an upside. You put that highest cost card from your hand onto the top of your deck. It pushes the Draenei together in the crew, and then you can get these bigger chains of combos together. Also, after you start shuffling the crewmates into your deck, you can use Narain's Soothe Fancy. The 2 fortunes will be copied to the top card of your deck. When you hit a crewmate, they will be 2 different crewmates, and they will be adjacent to one another, and they maybe can chain to other a crewmate that you have in your hand, and potentially that is some big mana cheat. Also, again, once you've put the crewmates into the deck, you could use something like Creation Protocol to get a copy of one with the Forge effect. I think that is a bit too weak of an effect to actually see any play, though. This brings us back to this boy, Eldritch Being. Now, you can see clearly what the gimmick was meant to be. You can use the Outcast or the Spellburst to shuffle your hand, and put these, like, little islands of Draenei all together. Personally, I think that is just stupid. I think you're just, again, you're at the mercy of the gods. Someone can work out the percentage of these at any situation, given the hand size and the amount of Draenei in your hand. But I think, generally speaking, the better course of action will just be to play cheap cards. Imagine you're playing just Outcast Demon Hunter, where that deck has worked in the past, and the reason it worked was a lot of the cards were cheap. So you could just vomit out the cards in your hand, in which case the Outcasts eventually just naturally shuffle to the left side of your hand. Similarly with the gimmick of the crewmates, if you just have enough cheap cards in your hand, the crewmates will all just assemble on the left side of your hand for you to play them eventually. And perhaps that's going to be the cycle of this deck, which is why I kind of see it a bit more mid-rangey, that you can cheat out maybe 2 or 3 crewmates if you're lucky at once. Then you'll play a few more turns of generating crewmates. Then you'll have this big wave again of playing more crewmates. So it's going to be like a power cycle of like big spike, drop, big spike, drop. And I kind of like the idea of that gameplay loop. So we'll see if this does work. I'm actually kind of intrigued by it though. Alright, now we have to put ourselves into the realms of depression because I have to show you the starship mechanic. Demon Hunter also has a starship build. I will say the minions in this package aren't as bad as the other ones, but I'm still not sold on the gimmick. Anyway, we have Shatter Shard Turret. 3 mana 2/4 minion with Rush, Wind Fury, and it's a starship piece. It's Crab Rider, ladies and gentlemen. It's back. I will say I have the vague memories of Crab Rider actually seeing some play. I think in the part because it was a Murloc and has Wind Fury on it, and Wind Fury is a pretty good keyword to have in an aggro deck, and Murlocs were normally aggro decks. I seem to also remember Paladin running it, and I think Paladin had a 1-attack synergy at one point, and Crab Rider met the bill for that deck. So, was it even in Secret Paladin? Was that what it was in? I can't remember now, but Crab Rider has actually seen a little bit of play. For 1 mana more, you get 1 more attack on your Crab Rider. Is that worth it? Probably not, especially not without the keyword on it. Crab Rider was way harder to deal with on turn 2 with the 4 health than Shatter Shard Turret is going to be on 3 with 4 health. That is just a simple mass of the situation. Also, if you really think about it, Rush Wind Fury with a 2 attack, assuming the minion dies during the 2 attacks, is just Cleave for 1 more mana, and Cleave wouldn't see play in Standard nowadays. Sure, there is the potential upside that this Rush Wind Furies into 2 opposing minions and lives, in which case it's Cleave plus. But still, the plus situation is it's Cleave with effectively like a 1 mana 2/1 Wind Fury Rush minion on it. Would that see play in Standard? Maybe, but I don't think it would be. So I think not terrible. Like, it's still 3 mana for 6 stat lines, which isn't completely crazy for Hearthstone. A bit weak, but we've seen for all the starship pieces, they're all weaker than you want them to be on the turn that you play them. And I think this is only slightly weaker though. I'll also say, one of the nice things that this card has is that Demon Hunter still has the remnants of a Rush package with Halveria, Dark Raven, and Rush the Stage. So you could actually tutor for the Starship piece with Rush the Stage. And actually a lot of the other Starship pieces, because none of them have tribes on them, are pretty hard to tutor for. By the way, my theory on this agrees with, like, I've seen some other comments about this saying, like, why are these pieces not mechs, generally speaking? Because a lot of them are clearly, like, mech-like. And my gut instinct is that magnetizing these minions broke the coding of the game in some like horrible way, so they just had to get rid of it, since starships build up into a eventual starship at the end of the day. I think magnetizing stuff to it probably just broke that mechanic completely, so because of this they just put no tribes on it, so there's harder ways to interact this with other cards. That's my gut feeling. Anyway, this makes the other ones very hard to tutor for. Rush the Stage could actually tutor for your Shatter Shard Turret, and would also reduce its cost to a 2 mana 2/4 Rush Wind Fury. Would that see play in Standard? Yeah, I think actually 2 mana 2/4 Rush Wind Fury would see some play. I think control decks would consider running something like that. And actually, I think aggro decks would consider running something like that as well, so that's not completely crazy. It does mean you have to play 3 mana, draw 2 cards, but, you know, not the absolute craziest of scenarios. And also with Halveria, by the way, if that did see play in this deck, and it might actually see play in this deck as some sort of like pseudo-Rush Demon Hunter deck, the Rush Wind Fury effect works so nicely with the Halveria effect if you combo it together, because you'll trigger Halveria twice, which is a lot of attack, you know, if you're getting a board full of minions. And actually, again, to spoil the party of this, I do see this Starship deck as being more of a tempo orientated deck, and in fact maybe even goes with the Draenei deck. I don't think it will do, but I think the idea of this deck is to keep playing lots and lots of tokens and lots and lots of minions on the board to try and abuse this card with Halveria, and probably with the Felfuse Battery. 2 mana 2/3 Starship piece. After this attacks, give your other minions 1 attack. Okay. 2 mana 2/3, fantastic. This is a very standard stat line for a 2 mana minion. This isn't crazy out of the realm of a standard card. I will say the effect of this card, though, giving your other minions 1 attack, is very close to Sow the Soil, which was a 1 mana effect. Now, it's actually worse than Sow the Soil because it itself does not get the stat line, but not completely crazy for an aggro deck. You can imagine a situation maybe where you play this Fel-Fused Battery, you get it to live on the board, the Sigil of the Skydiving comes up on another turn, you attack with the Fel-Fused Battery, and it turns all of your pirates into 2/1s instead, which have charge. I see the vision of this. Clearly the issue though is, this thing isn't going to live for a turn, right, at 2 mana 2/3 stat line. You will kill this pretty comfortably. So you kind of need to give it Rush. If this had Rush, it would actually be a very, very strong card in its own right. Now, Demon Hunter has ways to give things Rush. It's through Fel and Flames, and indeed, maybe that is the mechanic that you put together. You have this pretty aggressive opening, and you just pray that you get through Fel and Flames with your Fel-Fused Battery. That gives it Rush. It also gives it +1/+1 stat line, which makes it more likely to live. And this then gives one attack to all the other minions on the board, and you just keep smoking your opponent down with beans. You can also do this with Escape Pod, the new neutral card. You play your Fel-Fused Battery, you play your Escape Pod, you attack with the Escape Pod, it dies, gives the adjacent minion 1/1 and Rush, which is the Fel-Fused Battery. Ideally, there'll be another minion on the board with that. That will also get 1/1 and Rush. Your Battery will attack, that will give it another 1 attack. So overall, you're getting 1/1 onto all of your minions. Actually, you're getting 1/1 onto the Fel-Fused Battery and then 2/1 onto all other minions. So, not a crazy combo, but I think it's too many hoops to realistically jump through as you tempo it out. So it's probably something you would only ever see as a combo around 5 or 6. Do I think that's unfair enough? Probably not. One final way, and by the way, I think this is really stupid, don't do this. I actually got thinking that if the Starship piece, and this was before I actually saw the Starship pieces, but if the Starship pieces continue to be so poor, you might, in the Demon Hunter variant, want to just use Cliff Dive and try and hit your Starship pieces that way. Sure, it's an awful play to spend 6 mana to cheat out, like, you know, 2 and 3 mana cards, but at least you're not playing 3 or 4 bad turns when you play each Starship piece individually. It's just one really bad turn on turn 6 and try and recover from that, because then they'll ideally die in the process and you'll start assembling this Starship via Cliff Dive. I think it's really stupid, I don't think it will work, but it's a funny idea. One final card I just want to mention now, this is the payoff for doing your Starships, and it's actually a pretty good card. Warp Drive, 3 mana Fel spell for Demon Hunter, draw 2 cards. If you're building a Starship, they cost 2 less. Kind of similar to Natural Talent in some way. They were both 3 mana spells, both give you 2 cards, and they both reduce them by 2. Natural Talent did actually see some play. Now, here's where things diverge a little bit, because this card saw play in Razzle Dazzle, Shaman and Death Knight decks. The main reason this saw play was that the Razzle Dazzle needed a nature spell, and if you were doing this in Death Knight, which became the most popular variant, Death Knight didn't have nature spells, so Natural Talent just became the only choice they could take to put into that deck. Also, the random spell you generated could have a different spell school on it, which you couldn't get into Death Knight. That was the main reason for the advantage of Natural Talent. Otherwise, when that deck isn't working, this card doesn't see any play. And indeed, Razzle Dazzle has been nerfed recently, and the deck isn't seeing any play. And to be honest with you, that deck only saw play for about a week before people realized you can just race it down and beat it normally. Warp Drive isn't random spells, it isn't random Naga, it's cards you're putting into your deck. Fantastic. That's normally better than random stuff. And you're getting the 2 mana discount, so all in all, I think this is kind of worthwhile. You can kind of see this in some regard that it's -1 mana draw 2 cards. Now, this isn't the way the game works, unfortunately, because that would be pretty insane. It requires you to have a Starship on the board, which means you had to have played one of these bad cards in the deck. You also might not hit a 2 or more mana minion. And also the minions you hit, you might not be able to play on the turn you play the Warp Drive, which means you're pushing the value later into the game, which is normally weaker. I will say there's this, you know, there's this nice thing, if you can get a Starship piece on the board and you reduce your other Starship pieces by 2, it makes them way, way better to then play these cards. But you still have to play one bad card before you can do the Warp Drive. And honestly, when you think about this card, it's Arcane Intellect plus. Arcane Intellect doesn't see any play. I do think if this Starship deck is going to see some play, one of the big drives will be this Warp Drive, because it's potentially a pretty good refill, a potentially good cheat. If you're trying to fill the board with lots of cards, you need some sort of mana cheat to do that. You want to play as many Starship pieces as you can as well. If you're drawing the Starship pieces and you're reducing them, you're playing them, sure, even if you're playing lots of bad cards, it's fine. You can probably make that work. So I think this card is good. I've seen some people saying, like, it's fantastic. If it didn't have the requirement on it, I would agree with you, but I think because of the Starship requirement, it goes down a lot in my estimation. Alright, now we can do this fun thing we always do. The starship, by the way, for Demon Hunter is the Legion's Bane. Very cool name, by the way. Here are your starship pieces. It's Felfuse Battery, it's Shatter Shard Turret, and then Dimensional Core and Arcanite Defense Crystal. I think this is another card where, again, you're probably not going to use the Arcanite Defense Crystal on it. I think you'll use Dimensional Core instead, because it's better to have Divine Shield on a minion that is going to rush and have Wind Fury. Clearly, the intention of this card is to combine the Wind Fury of the turret with the Felfused Battery to give you +2 attack to all other minions instead of just +1 attack to all other minions. Do I think that's great? I don't know. Actually, there's one question I have for this, and I actually don't know the answer yet. I don't know how these stack when they are duplicates of a passive effect. Like, if you have 2 Felfused Batteries, you get +2 attack per attack, in which case I can kind of see why they're being very careful on this card. Because if you Wind Fury 2 of these things together, you'd be getting +4 attack to all your other minions. And that puts you in the realm of some sort of OTK deck. It kind of reminds me, for example, of combining like Kayn Sunfury with Halvaria Darkraven, which, by the way, you might also want to put into this deck because you are going to have your starship with Rush on it, so they do naturally combine. But rather than having, like, ignore all taunt minions with Kayn's charge, you just have this big, beefy starship that just bonks the opponent minions instead and clears the path. I think that's the idea, and then you have a board full of minions with it, that you give them all +1 attack, or +2 attack, or +4 attack, there or thereabouts. And ideally, maybe these are the parachuting pirates that have charged naturally, and you just smoke them into your opponent's face. I think that is the gimmick. However, I'm not sure that's going to work, to be honest with you, because again, you're sort of tripping over yourself. If you're trying to play this as some sort of aggro tempo deck, you don't want to be playing the Felfuse Battery, you don't really want to be playing the Shatter Shard Turret, you don't want to be playing Dimensional Core for certain. That card is really weak. But you have to do this, so you're taking all these turns off in the early game. The whole point of aggro is that you're cheating, you're doing really strong stuff early, like the strongest stuff you can possibly do early. Earlier than the control decks can deal with it. And this just isn't it. It's like you're playing make-believe as a aggro deck, but surprise, I'm a combo deck. I feel like that's kind of how this is meant to work, so I just don't see it. I think it's pretty weak, and I actually think all the starships are pretty weak so far. I think we have one more starship to see now before the end of the set, and I'm not going to lie, my current gut feeling of the starships is it's actually probably the worst mechanic they've ever introduced to Hearthstone. A very strong take, but I think all of them are really, really underwhelming. And the only way they would be overwhelming is if they were actually disgustingly broken. They just can't get over the fact that there are so many spells that exist in Hearthstone, or so many minions in Hearthstone that just say, destroy a guy. And because of that, you don't want to jump through hoops of playing weak cards during the course of the game, to then have this payoff of one really good card that just gets destroyed by one card. It's like having a combination of 3 or 4 cards together, like playing this 4-turn combo, and I'm going, haha, this is my most powerful weapon, and then just play 1 card and destroy your 4-card combo. It feels really shit. It'd be a huge loss of tempo. Basically, you will lose the game when that happens. And you're just praying that they don't have this, and then your starship is, like, obviously good cheating for the cost. Rather than doing this, though, why don't you just play 1 good card in your deck? I feel like that's going to be the compromise. So, I don't see it. One final card we have, I don't really know where this would go into. We have Infiltrate. 3 mana Demon Hunter spell. Choose a minion. Deal 3 damage to all other minions. I kind of see this a bit like something like the Dustbreaker or Arcanosaur effect. Dustbreaker is you're holding a dragon dealt 3 damage to all other minions. It's kind of similar to Infiltrate in the fact that you're choosing the Dustbreaker, I suppose, for this scenario, and then getting the Dustbreaker-like effect on the Infiltrate. If you imagine that Dustbreaker is about a 2 mana worth of stats, it sort of implies that this deal 3 damage to all of the minions could be powered at a 2 mana level. Now, I will say you had to be holding a dragon, so there was a condition on it, which kind of helped with the mana cheat. So, I think 3 mana deal 3 to all other minions isn't crazy for standard. I think it's very reasonable. And actually, if you look at Arcanosaur, which I think didn't see any play, or saw very little play at the best, that required you to play an elemental on the previous turn, but was way more in mana cost compared to Dustbreaker. So there is some sort of like wiggle room in here for a card like this to see play. The other card you can start to compare this to is stuff like Fire Sale, for example, which was 4 mana deal 3 damage to all minions, so you didn't get to keep 1 alive. And a Volcanic Potion is 3 mana to do 2 to all minions. The way I kind of, like, I've been imagining this is, if you put a 1-mana minion on the board and you use Infiltrate on that 1-mana minion, you're getting Fire Sale Plus, effectively, because you're doing 3 damage to everything except for that 1 minion. Fire Sale did see a little bit of play when the meta was specifically very aggro, and that's kind of how I see Infiltrate as well. If the meta is very, very aggressive and there's a lot of token decks out there, this is actually a really good tech card against those aggro decks, so I see a world where Infiltrate will see some play, but I'm not sure you'll see it very early on. I'm actually not sure how the meta will settle down. Like, it's very hard to read the game right now because they nerfed one of the key cards. Actually, they've nerfed a few key cards in some of the big aggro decks out there. And also they put Renathal in the game, which naturally just slows the game down anyway. So I don't know where Infiltrate will sit. I don't know where the meta is going to be exactly when this set comes out. That's going to be a hard read, but we'll try and work things out. I think there are some decks that are still going to be pretty aggressive. However, dealing 3 damage to all of the minions might not actually be good enough to see play in those decks. They might actually have more than 3 health. I'm not sure, though. We'll have to see. I certainly don't think this is a bad card. I think it's fine. I will say one other downside to this card as well, which is kind of like the why this card won't see play, is if you don't have a minion on board, you have to choose your opponent's minion instead. You don't get to, like, have a say in the matter. In which case, obviously, it's like Fire Sale minus, which makes sense because, you know, you're spending 3 mana rather than 4, but it's a pretty brutal situation to be in. Obviously, you'll pick the minion with the least amount of attack, or you'll pick the minion that you know, wouldn't die through Infiltrate anyway, and you'll kill everything else off. But ideally, you want to play a minion with this, which means that it does bring you back into Fire Sale's ballpark range, where if you're spending the mana on the minion so that you can choose your own minion to get hit by this, if you're hitting a 1-mana minion, you're basically saying it's Fire Sale with a 1-2 on the board or something like that type of deal. It's okay. It's around Fire Sale power level. Fire Sale didn't see that much play. It did see a little bit of play. I kind of see the same thing for Infiltrate. Anyway, that is the Demon Hunter reveals. I will say there was also a spoiler for one of the Rogue cards in one of the Demon Hunter reveals that they teased under the card. I will deal with that tomorrow with the rest of the Rogue reveals instead. If you enjoyed this one, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Everything helps me out. And I'll see you again next time. Bye.